newly elected chairman of the Economic Community of West African States, Bola Tinubu, stressed the need for urgent and collective action to address terrorism and a growing trend of military takeovers in West Africa. Adebayo Adeleke, the Chief Executive Officer of Supply Chain Africa and a security expert, joins me virtually for more on this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Adebayo. Now, ECOWAS's announcement of President Tinubu as chairperson really comes with calls for swift action against insecurity. This definitely includes terrorism and coups, which he says have reached alarming levels. Now, understanding the interplay between politics, security, and socioeconomic indicators, what's your reading of this inaugural speech from Nigeria's president, who is chair of ECOWAS Commission?
Good afternoon, David, and it's always good to be here again. And congratulations to President Tinubu on his election as the chairman of ECOWAS. ECOWAS has been, for lack of a better word, has been kind of recessive over the course of time. It's not the old ECOWAS that we have in the 80s and the early 90s that took for forefront in fighting insecurity in the Western nations of the Sub-Sahara. So, and number one, the problem that is saddled with this set of nations, 15 nations right now, is security. If you look at across the Sahel, you see that most of the countries that are having issues with insecurity are pretty much West African countries. We have one going on in Guinea, is somewhat stable right now. We have Mali, we have Burkina Faso, and also Nigeria also has own issues that we are playing out with Niger, Chad, and Cameroon as well. Though some of these nations are not part of ECOWAS, but the security corridors, logistical corridors are all infected. And if people are not secured, if routes are not secured, apparently there will not be economic activities going in that region. But one thing that Nigeria can pride itself for, and what Nigeria can show as one of the things they've done in the last 3 years, maritime security that's been pretty much top-notch over the last 3 years. And it will be quite surprising to a lot of people that in the last 3 years, Nigeria hasn't had an issue of piracy, because they've actually have a concerted effort in that maritime domain, and they can actually extend that in the Gulf of what is Nigeria has done in the Gulf of Guinea. They can actually extend that to all these other coastal nations in West Africa. So these are some of the things that President Tinubu has to address, and he is kind of in a very interesting position, because it's just it's just getting to the saddle to lead Nigeria, at the same time lead West African nations. So a lot is required of him. But one thing that is for sure is that both headquarters, both Nigerian seat of power and also ECOWAS seat of power, also resides in Abuja. So it probably be shuttling between these locations. But I believe if there's anybody that can do it is the President Tinubu. And he has postured so far.
I hear you, Adebayo, when you say we are making improvement in terms of maritime security, but that's not the entirety of the picture, because for the fact that we've seen insurgency still rise, banditry, kidnapping, and a whole lot more. So we cannot just waive the success of maritime security as the entirety of the progress made in terms of our security architecture. So how much pressure do you think this places on Nigeria now to get security right on track? Because these issues at home are the defining element of whether or not we would see the ECOWAS chair have this cause take any meaning at all.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right, David. Yes, we've struggled seriously in Nigeria to grapple with our own insurgency, and now we're also saddled via the president to actually lead the charge in the other West African nations. But the president's posture has changed. As you can see, he's revamping the national security strategy for Nigeria. He has changed the service chiefs. He has outlined internally what security and this number one issue right now is to fight insurgency and terrorism in Nigeria. And I believe that by large, that's going to transfer to the rest of African nations. And I believe so, that because I've seen what Nigerian armed forces have been able to do recently in Nigeria and what they can do overseas as well. So I'm very optimistic. I mean, our track record so far in the last 8 years might not be the ideal thing to do, especially if you're kind of not to lead your own country, but also lead other 14 African countries in the same charge. But let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. But I'm quite hopeful because of what a lot of things has been done so far to position and be able to fight terrorism both home and abroad.
A big element to solving some of these issues is also the utilization of frameworks at our disposal to ensure that this menace of insecurity is checked. And now, when we are talking about regional integration, first and foremost, do you think we have that sound framework before we now start talking about regional integration and harmonizing regional efforts of frameworks? Because one of the missing elements we've not necessarily ticked is that intelligence sharing or intelligence utilization to find the hotspots and work on such information. And for the fact that the scramble for Africa will still continue, we are seeing the geopolitical shift in alliances play a big part in some of the conflicts and transitions. Talking about elections we've seen so far.
Absolutely, you're right, David. You're right on point today as per when it comes to the frameworks. Yes, the frameworks are there for ECOWAS, and unfortunately, over the last few years have not been really activated. Let's see what happened in Mali. I mean, they put in some, embargoes and kind of expel Mali from ECOWAS, hoping that it's going to turn the people against the military government. But in the opposite actually happened. People are now more emboldened and actually have hatred towards ECOWAS. So it's very interesting. But there's a lot of frameworks but ability to actually, there's leadership needed to actually activate this framework to make it work. Yes, those things are dormant. Yes, those things are rusty. They need to be kind of dust off and work again. And again, I know you don't like me kind of pointing to the success, but we have to look at the success that we've been able to achieve as a collective of West African nations, which is what we've been able to do in the Gulf of Guinea. If we can actually use that as a prime example of what can be done if these frameworks are really used. Look at, for example, the Yaoundé Accord and look at the Accra initiative as well. Some of those things are there, and we can actually continue to empower these initiatives. Yes. And this particular accord to be able to help these West African nations to achieve a secured environment.
Adebayo, one of the news we had over the weekend was the announcement from Gabon's President Ali Bongo saying he's going to run for office for a third term after 2 terms of 7 years. This definitely is one of the conversation points. So many will be looking at how President Tinubu is also going to definitely talking about democratic transitions and easing away from this hold on power. To what extent do you think this might likely cause some unrest in Gabon?
Our ECOWAS regional economic bloc is quite limited in this sphere as well. So President Tinubu has to rely on cooperation and working with other African nations to achieve this objective. But as you know, Gabon constitutionally they have unlimited time limit, so it's going to be, I don't know how much reach he has in that sphere.
We saw what panned out in 2016.
What do you say?
We saw what panned out in 2016, talking about the unrest.
Exactly, but what we need to address, especially across West Africa, is the socioeconomic disparity that is actually causing this unrest. Okay. We've seen it in Burkina Faso, we've seen it in Mali, and we've seen it in Guinea as well. These and the influx of young people who has no other prospects. So this is what is actually causing the political. It's not about, Africa over the course of time are used to, their leaders staying over time, but as long as their socioeconomic needs are met, I think most Africans are quite.
Okay, Adebayo, thank you so much for your time on the show today. For the lack of time, we'll leave the conversation here. That was Adebayo Adeleke, the Chief Executive Officer of Supply Chain Africa and a security expert.